Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's online webinar, which is titled Digital Asset Management for Heritage Organizations, which is brought to you by Exmonorth Digital. It's great to see everyone here, and thank you for joining us. My name's James. I'm here from the Exmonorth team, and a little bit about Exmonorth Digital itself. Exmonorth Digital is Highlands and Islands enterprise mechanism for specialist digital support for the heritage and creative economies across the Highland Council region. This workshop is delivered through Northern Innovation Hub, which is designed to build on and accelerate business innovation. It is funded through the Inverness and Highland City Region Deal, a joint initiative supported by £350 million of investment from the UK and Scottish governments, Highland Council, HIE and UHI. I'm going to now pass across to our Heritage Sector Specialist, Nicola Henderson. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, James. Fiskerma, Ula, good afternoon. Lovely to see you all on this rather chilly afternoon, where some people I think have got the snow just arriving. For anybody who doesn't know, I'm Nicola Henderson, the Heritage Specialist for Exmonorth Digital. And today I'm joined by Alex Cron, Rachel Jacobson and Jim Dunn to discuss digital asset management for heritage organisations that typically have quite small teams and resources at their disposal. Alex has worked in both commercial and arts and culture sectors for and alongside museums as the Curator of Collections at the San Diego Model Railroad Museum, Digital Operations and Collections Information Analyst at Balboa Park Online Collaborative, Digital Preservation Lecturer for Johns Hopkins University Museum Studies and Digital Curation Programs, and currently is the Community Engagement and Business Development Manager for Terentia. Rachel has a diverse background in archives, digital asset management and preservation. Her experience includes grant, contract and other temporary positions in government-funded museums, Senate offices, non-profits and universities. Currently, Rachel is working as the Digital Repository and Preservation Librarian at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. Jim is a photographer who has over 40 years' experience in fine art, museums, social documentary and PR, working both within large organisations like Glasgow Museums and alongside small Highland museums as part of his freelance work. Today, together we'll be exploring the importance of digital asset management, how to assess your museum's needs, how to choose the right solution for you, how to organise your assets, and the long-term management and maintenance of those assets. We're going to kick off today with Alex, who's going to guide us through the process of digital asset management to help us get a picture of what we need to consider before choosing the right solution for our organisation based on capacity, resources and need. After Alex, we will hear from Rachel and Jim, who will give practical examples of working in larger and smaller institutions and how they have tackled the issues of digital asset management. We will then have time for questions at the end. However, if you do have a burning question that you'd like to ask during a presentation, please pop it in the chat or the Q&A box and I'll keep an eye on it and see if we can pop it in a little earlier. I think that's all from me just now. So if I can pass to you, Alex, we'll get going.
Thank you, Nicola. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to make sure, and I want to double check that everyone is able to see my presentation.
Yep, that's working.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. As Nicola introduced, I'm Alex Cron. Today I'll be covering dams without IT. As Nicola mentioned, I am with Terentia. Before I worked for Terentia, I worked for Balboa Park Online Collaborative, a nonprofit tech consultancy. Much of my work focused on researching, selecting, and implementing cultural technology solutions for cultural institutions of varying sizes, and provide guidance around collections management, digital asset management, and digital preservation. Prior to that, I worked for a small museum, the San Diego Model Railroad Museum, as their Curator of Collections. At the San Diego Model Railroad Museum, I was the only staff member dedicated to managing the museum's collections. The museum's library and archives were overseen by myself, but were, for the most part, managed by a group of volunteers. When I started at the museum, a digital asset management system had already been selected by museum leadership, but it had not yet been implemented. The dam selected by the museum was part of a consortium model where several museums in the park, Balboa Park in San Diego, California, paid into the dam's platform at a discounted rate and had their own instance of the dams within a shared environment. I wanted to be sure to mention this because it is a funding model that has often been used by groups of small institutions to help offset the costs associated with a collections or digital asset management system. Much of this presentation includes things that I wish I had known and what I think would have been helpful in making that implementation more successful. Before I get into all of that, I think it's really important to talk about what digital asset management means in the context of a digital asset management system and why it is important. Now I'm going to refer to DAMs broadly because depending on your organization's resources, you may use Google Drive, Dropbox, SharePoint, Airtable, spreadsheets to manage your digital assets. So with that said, digital asset management is both the processes and technologies used to organize, store, and retrieve digital assets like images, videos, documents, and other multimedia content. Oftentimes, but not always the case, a centralized repository is used where assets are categorized, tagged with metadata, made accessible to authorized users, edited, and distributed. Now, why digital asset management is important is because it provides a structured, efficient, and secure way to manage, store, and access digital content. Now, assessing your organization's needs. When preparing to select and implement a DAMS, it's crucial that your organization assesses its digital asset management needs. The goal is to understand both current challenges and future growth opportunities tied to your digital content, starting with identifying and evaluating current digital assets. Your museum might have hundreds or thousands of digital images of its collections alongside promotional materials, educational resources, video recordings of events, oral histories. When evaluating your digital assets, you should really consider what formats are these assets in. How are they currently stored and managed? Where are they located? Are there any duplicates or redundant files? It may be helpful for your organization to put together a digital asset register. The digital asset register will help you inventory your digital assets, identifying the various file types and storage media. The Digital Preservation Coalition, I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with who they are, has an excellent toolkit for this work. And I do want to mention all of the resources that I'm going to be talking about in this presentation. I have a reference slide at the end of my presentation that will be available to everyone after the webinar. Next, you're going to want to define your purpose for the DAMs. Different organizations use DAMs for various reasons. By defining specific objectives, your organization can better align its DAMs search with these outcomes. Some examples might be faster access to assets for internal teams, ensuring only approved up-to-date assets are used, whether that's for marketing and communications, or if there's assets that you want to display on your website. Next is protecting valuable digital content for long-term use, streamlining the sharing of content between internal teams or external partners. So if you get a lot of reproduction or license requests for digital images, so that's also important to be able to manage. Next, you want to understand the needs of your different users. Even if you're a small organization, collection staff might need a DAMS for digital preservation and easy retrieval of archival content, while your education staff may need access to collections assets or programming materials. Your organization should gather this feedback from key user groups to understand their specific needs, what kinds of assets they need to have access to, and the levels of access that they need, whether or not they need to be able to make edits to the metadata or make edits to the images, or if they only need to be able to view them and download them. Next, you want to define your key functional requirements. Now, your organization should outline the specific functional requirements needed for a DAMS. For example, do users need advanced search features like keywords, metadata, or file type searches? Do you need different levels of access for different users or external collaborators? Is it important to track the history of changes that are made to the digital assets? Do you need to integrate the DAMs with other systems like a collections management system or a website? Access technical constraints. It's equally important to understand technical constraints your organization might face. For example, because we're talking about dams without IT, if your organization doesn't have a dedicated IT staff member or department, a cloud-based dams with minimal setup might be preferable to you. Some questions, internal questions that you might want to ask yourselves is, what level of IT support is available? What do you need when it comes to the dams? And that will help you identify, which vendors make sense for your organization. Some other questions you might want to ask is, how important is data security and privacy? And as I mentioned, what preferred deployment? I mentioned cloud-based is, a good example for minimal setup, whereas on the opposite of that, on-premise, if you have, staff that are technical, capable of managing that on-site, that's another option. Next is budget and resource allocation. Budget is another critical factor in your dam selection. Your organization needs to understand how much it can allocate towards purchasing, implementing, and maintaining a dams. Considerations you want to include are initial costs like licensing fees, installation and setup costs, ongoing fees. Oftentimes dams will have subscription fees, and that includes support, training, and upgrades. And then, of course, training and support. Does the organization have the bandwidth to train staff and volunteers? Or are you going to need ongoing external support from the vendor for that training? Next, you want to evaluate future growth and scalability. As the volume of your digital assets grow and technology evolves, the dams needs to be able to scale and adapt to that. Some questions that you need to consider are, how quickly the volume of digital content increases. Are you actively digitizing objects in your collection or archival materials? Will the organization need to support new file types? Will the system need to accommodate more users or departments over time as your organization grows? What's really important is to capture all of this information into a requirements document. This document will act as a guide while you're researching dams, and it should be shared with potential vendors. It really should clearly outline your assessment findings and what your organization's needs are. Another helpful tool you might consider is the digital asset management capability model. This framework helps organizations assess their current practices and plan for improving and evolving those practices over time. So where do you start in your search process? Word of mouth is the most often way I've seen museum professionals learn of dams available in the market. And while this is a good place to start, it can also backfire on you. Your colleague who recommended a dams that they're using, their organization may have very different needs from your organization. So it's important to broaden your search. I recommend also researching vendors that are profiled on the Collections Trust website as an example, as they're often Spectrum compliant, or the Canadian Heritage Information Network's website, as well as vendors, as well as you want to research vendors that are sponsoring or attending local, regional, and specialized conferences, as well as more commercial websites like G2, where you can review and compare options. While you're researching dams, be sure to confirm that the dams will support broader goals like operational efficiency, preservation of digital content, improving collaboration. Your organization's needs serve as a filter for narrowing down dams that align with both short-term requirements and long-term organizational goals. Next, you're going to want to prioritize the key features and functionalities that the dams must offer. This might look like organizing these key features and functionalities by must-haves or nice-to-haves. While many dams share common features, it's important to choose one that excels in the areas that are most relevant to your organization. For example, Does the DAMS easily allow you to tag and categorize assets with rich metadata? Does it provide advanced search tools? Can you set user roles to ensure the right people have access to the right content, and that sensitive and restricted assets are protected? There's quite a few others, but I know I need to get through this pretty quickly because we want to have time for Rachel and Jim. Next, you want to consider how the DAMs will fit within your existing technical infrastructure. DAMs typically come in 3 deployments, as I mentioned: cloud-based, on-prem, and then there's hybrid. Talking a little bit more about hybrid, there's some DAMs that will offer a hybrid model with the flexibility of cloud access, but also within the control of an on-premise data storage. Make sure you consider your organization's technical resources, data security requirements, preferences for control over infrastructure, and when deciding which deployment model best fits your needs. Next, you want to understand integration and workflow capabilities. Digital assets don't exist in isolation. They are most often part of larger workflows and processes within your organization. A DAMS should seamlessly integrate with existing tools and systems your teams already rely on, such as a collections management system or a website. Assess how well the DAMS integrates with these platforms to ensure it enhances your team's workflow rather than creating additional steps or bottlenecks. Next, ensure user friendliness and adoption potential. This is especially important when you're working with volunteers, folks who may not be really familiar with a digital asset management system or databases in general. Even the most feature-rich DAMs is only as valuable as it is to easily use and it encourages adoption by your team. So, pay attention to if the system's intuitive and easy to navigate for all user levels. What support does the vendor provide for training users and ensuring smooth onboarding? Are there learning resources or client support available to help staff, become proficient in using the system? Test and pilot potential solutions. I cannot recommend this enough, but recommend narrowing down your options to a top 3 to 5 to test or pilot before making a final decision. Many vendors offer free trials, demos, or even pilot programs that allow you to test the system in your organization's environment. If that's not possible, I highly suggest that you ask them, to do demos for you with your digital assets and your data. Test or see, demoed how the DAMS handles your specific asset types and workflows. Gather feedback from different interest groups or different interest holders or user groups within your organization to assess whether the system is going to meet their needs and is intuitive to use. Before fully committing, you want to be confident that the solution is going to deliver the functionality and ease of use that your organization requires. So the implementation process, it can really seem, daunting. It can be a long process, but I believe you guys can get through it. Especially if you are prepared, this can help the transition go smoothly. It's important to assemble a team that will work together to oversee the process and ensure its success. This team should include representatives from all key areas of the organization that will use the DAMs. But in smaller organizations, this may be a single staff member or even a handful of volunteers. Regardless the size of your team, it is important to be clear on roles, expectations, and who will be the main point of contact from your organization. So some roles that you might want to consider is the project manager or point of contact, who's responsible for overseeing the entire implementation process and coordinating between interest holders and communicating directly with the DAMS provider. A tech lead, someone in your organization who has more technical experience and knowledge, such as familiarity with working with digital assets or digital asset management system. They'll handle support requests in the organization's and address technical concerns. This ensures the organization's required features and functionality in the DAMs are implemented smoothly and adoption is successful. And then key interest holders or departmental representatives, if your organization's large enough for that, users from various departments, collections, marketing, operations, will provide insights into the specific needs and workflows that they will need. So configuring the dams to meet your needs. You want to include everything from metadata fields and workflows to user permissions and access controls. Now, the level of customization is going to vary depending on the dams. Some are more configurable than others. For example, some dams are limited in the number of data fields you can customize, while other dams, their schema can be mapped to match your organization. Key areas for customization, metadata fields, of course, folder structures, user roles and permissions, approval workflows if you need more guide rails within your workflows in the digital asset management system. By tailoring the dams to your specific requirements, you create an environment that supports your organization's workflows, increases user adoption, and minimizes confusion. Once the dams is set up and assets are migrated, it's time to train your users on how to use it effectively. Comprehensive training and onboarding sessions ensure that users understand how to find, manage, and collaborate with assets in the system. Some dams vendors provide onboarding and training for free. Sometimes this is at an additional cost, so make sure that's something that you are aware of going into this. Consider how your staff learns. I find this really important, especially for me with a learning disability. What works best for your team? What types of training do you need to consider to encourage adoption? Role-specific training, user guides, hands-on demos, ongoing support. Make sure that you're tailoring your training sessions to the specific needs of each department or user group. Provide detailed user guides and documentation, including video tutorials. Host hands-on demo sessions where users can explore the dams in real time and ask questions. Set up ongoing support channels, whether that's through internal communications or by working with the vendor to address any issues that users encounter after training. Now, with training completed, it's important to test and optimize workflows in the early stages of implementation, gather feedback from users, and make adjustments as necessary. Some areas that you want to assess include system performance, are assets loading quickly, is the search functionality delivering accurate results, workflow efficiency, are users able to find, load, and share assets easily? User satisfaction. Regularly check in with users to gather feedback on how the dams is working for them. Address any pain points or suggestions for improvement. By carefully planning the implementation process, customizing your dams to meet your needs, and ensuring users are trained and engaged, you set the stage for success. So ideally, you've completed an audit for your assets at this stage. So now it's time to clean up your files to get ready for migration. Start by consolidating files, eliminating duplicates, and deleting irrelevant assets. Next, you want to establish a metadata strategy for your dams if you don't already have one. One of the most powerful features of a dams is the ability to categorize and make digital assets easily searchable through the use of metadata. Some items to consider if you need to establish a metadata strategy: define your metadata fields, identify the key pieces of information that will be used to tag and categorize assets, standardize metadata, ensure consistency in how metadata is applied, adopting metadata schemas like Dublin Core as an example. Consistency in your metadata will make searching for assets more accurate and efficient. Applying metadata retroactively. Depending on the number of assets you manage, it may be necessary to apply metadata to your existing files before importing them into the dams. While some dams can automate metadata generation to an extent through AI-powered tagging as an example, manually adding important metadata at the outset will increase the reliability of the system. In addition to metadata, another key element of asset preparation is establishing a file naming convention if you don't already have one. The way assets are named should follow a clear logical structure that makes it easy to identify and search for assets based on the file name alone. The University of Glasgow has a great resource for file naming that can help get you started if you're not aware of it already. Next, define your user roles and permissions. Again, while assessing your organization's needs, you should have identified and documented user needs. These needs will be critical for configuring user roles and permissions in the DAMs. So you want to consider levels of access, identify which users will need full access versus those who will need read-only access. Approval workflows. Determine if certain assets need approval before being shared or used, and assign appropriate workflows to ensure quality control. Also consider security and privacy to ensure that confidential and restricted assets are only accessible to those who have the proper authorization. So with your assets audited, organized, and tagged with appropriate metadata, you are ready for migration. To prepare for migration, you want to create a migration plan. Decide whether you will migrate all assets at once, a full migration, or phase the migration by asset type, department, or priority. I highly recommend for smaller organizations a phased migration, just because I know, time and resources are limited. And so you want to be able to make sure that you are, getting the most out of this migration. Perform a migration test. Before migrating all assets, perform a small scale test migration with a subset of assets to ensure everything transfers smoothly. This allows you to troubleshoot any issues before the migration. Last, ensure backups. Back up all of your assets before migration to protect against any potential data loss during the transition. Now, depending on the DAMs you select and the services offered by the DAMs vendor, you may or may not have some level of support during the migration process. If support is minimal, I would recommend getting staff or volunteers who will be migrating the assets familiar with the DAM's asset loader or using a hot folder and spreadsheet to load the assets and related metadata into the DAMs. So once you're up and running, the focus shifts from implementation to long-term maintenance and management. For many organizations, post-implementation is where the DAMs begins to really show its value, streamlining workflows, improving asset accessibility, and enhancing collaboration. To ensure that the system remains effective and continues to deliver results over time, post-implementation really is essential. So long-term maintenance and management involves tracking system usage, assessing technical performance, and ensuring that the DAMs continues to meet the organization's evolving needs. Regularly check for any slow loading times, search inefficiencies, or performance lags, especially as your digital asset collection grows. Ensure your storage allocation meets current and future needs. DAMs often have thresholds based on storage limits. Keep an eye on user behavior within the system. What assets are being accessed more frequently? And any recurring user issues or backlogs. Schedule periodic audits or health checks to review whether any areas of the system need maintenance or upgrades. As your digital asset collection grows, the system must scale accordingly. This could involve increasing storage capacity, expanding user roles, or incorporating new asset types. Your initial metadata structures may need to evolve to accommodate new types of assets or these changing workflows or organizational shifts. Conduct periodic audits to ensure that metadata fields are still accurate, relevant, and in line with how users search for assets. Establish a governance policy for metadata management if you don't already have one. This should define who is responsible for updating metadata fields, how new metadata categories are added, and how users should tag assets. gather regular feedback from users to understand if they are experiencing difficulties with metadata or search functionality. Adjust metadata fields based on this feedback to improve the system's usability. As your organization evolves, new employees will need to be trained on how to use the dams effectively. And in addition, existing employees may need, refresher courses, especially if new features or updates are added to the system. So, host regular training sessions, keep user guides, tutorials, and video walkthroughs up to date, create open lines of communication for users to ask questions, raise issues, or request additional support. Ongoing education ensures that all users, new and experienced, are consistently able to leverage the full power of the dams, leading to higher user adoption and satisfaction. Dams need regular updates to stay current with evolving technology standards, security protocols, and new features. So staying on top of these updates ensures the system remains secure and functional. So monitor the dams vendors' updates and enhancements. Keep an eye on security vulnerabilities or patches provided by the vendor. Over time, your organization may adopt new tools or software that need to be integrated with the dams. So ensure that these integrations are seamless and enhance the overall organization's workflows. One critical aspect of long-term dams maintenance is ensuring proper governance and role management. This involves controlling who has access to what types of assets, enforcing consistent workflows, and ensuring that all users comply with legal and regulatory standards if applicable. So regularly review user roles and permissions, maintain control over asset usage rights and licensing, use the system's reporting feature to track usage and monitor any unusual activity, set expiration dates for assets with restricted usage. Lastly, but one of the most important components of post-implementation success is building a dam culture within your organization. A DAMS is most effective when it is fully integrated into daily workflows and embraced by all users within your organization. So highlight the benefits of the DAMS in team meetings, communicate success stories, show how users across your organization are using the system, how it's saving them time, how it's increased efficiency in their work or reduced redundancy. Promote the DAMS as a shared resource that facilitates collaboration. Identify and celebrate power users who've become proficient and using the DAMS. They can serve as internal champions who help guide others in their departments. So as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, I work for Terentia. We do offer a small museum initiative. There are other DAMS vendors that offer similar, and several of our small museum clients, when they adopted the Terentia platform, they shared their experiences with us. So I just kind of wanted to share at a high level what some of those things were that they shared with us, because I thought they were important. And I've already touched on much of this in my presentation. So just really quickly, some final considerations. Automate where possible. Opt for automation features like auto tagging, file version control, and smart search functionalities to reduce the workload on volunteers and minimize human error. Pre-configure workflows if you can. Set up workflows for common tasks, such as asset uploading, metadata entry, and approval, so that volunteers can easily follow established procedures with little oversight. Assign clear roles. Define roles that align with skill sets of your volunteers. For example, some of your volunteers may focus on scanning and uploading assets, while others may focus on tagging and categorizing. Designate specific individuals as system administrators, data entry specialists, or quality control reviewers based on their experience and availability. Create tiered levels of access. Establish permissions based on volunteer roles. For example, some volunteers might have access to view and upload files, while others with more experience can edit the metadata and approve submissions. last and certainly not least, offer targeted training sessions, tailor those training sessions to their specific roles, focusing on the essentials to avoid overwhelming them, such as how to upload files, add metadata, and search for assets. Thank you all for your time. I really am, appreciative to be able to do this presentation for you all. I look forward to any questions you have, and please feel free to reach out to me directly if you have any questions after the webinar.
Thank you, Alex. There was a lot in there, and we'll maybe come back to Alex for some questions at the end. And we're running a little bit over, so I'll just pass straight over to Rachel really quickly. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. So I will share my slides. Great. So I will probably overlap a tiny bit with some of the things that Alex mentioned, but my focus is really talking about how to make sustainable digital asset management system or without a system decisions. So I became connected with this actually through being part of a webinar series with the Balboa Park Online Collective or Collaboration in 2020 or 2021. The years kind of blend together, so I'm not exactly sure which year, but at that point I gave a talk called Digital Asset Management Without the System. This was when I was a temporary employee. I had a 3-year grant with a relatively small but well-established art museum in Washington, D.C. called the Phillips Collection. And I was employed there through the Institute of Museum and Library Services grant. And the main purpose of the grant was to bring more access and attention to 2 archival collections from the museum, one of which was an underrepresented collection. So as Alex kind of mentioned, this is a screenshot of an archival management systems feature matrix, which I'll get into in a minute. So as I said, the main scope of the grant was to help make these 2 archival collections more visible and more available to researchers as well as to people that worked within the museum themselves. This project became particularly relevant with the onset of COVID-19 because a big portion of the grant was devoted to getting this material digitized, which obviously meant when people were working remotely, they would still be able to access the collection, which was a huge, huge bonus. So as I'm assuming many of you are familiar with when a smaller museum or really any museum that's slightly underfunded or understaffed, which is most of them, gets a grant, it's very common to kind of pigeonhole other needs into a grant, even if it isn't necessarily something that goes with the main purpose of the grant. So what happened for in my position at the Phillips Collection, which has since ended, one of the things they wanted to do was use some of the grant to get a digital asset management system. I had the experience of working at National Geographic Society, which is obviously a huge institution, internationally known, with really good funding, for cultural heritage organizations. And in that position, I was part of a team that helped to pick a digital asset management system for the entire Nat Geo, which included, of course, these feature matrices, which I won't go into detail because Alex kind of reviewed that of like how to make sure that you're getting all of the things that you actually need versus what are nice things to have. But in order to fulfill the digital asset management system feature matrix, there was actually a representative from every single department at National Geographic. And this was because, again, as was mentioned previously, DAMs are really used by everybody in the museum. It's most likely that conservators or collection managers or archivists are the ones that are actually inputting data and images and files into the system. but they really are meant to be used by people from the marketing team, to docents, to curators. So it just seemed to me that given that experience that I had at Nat Geo, that kind of pigeonholing this idea of getting the digital asset management system into this grant that was really meant to serve a very different purpose didn't feel like a sustainable choice. And so although people were, I think, a bit disappointed, I think they understood that it really was scope creep to kind of undergo this whole museum-wide research experience, which is what's required to make sure that you're picking a good platform. So we went back to the original purpose of the grant, which of course was to digitize and get these 2 archival collections onto the museum's website. One thing that was really great, because this was a very short-staffed museum, was that there was already a workflow and system in place for getting the the permanent collection on the museum's website. So this is a screenshot of MIMSIXG, which is the collections management system that was used and I think is still used at the Phillips collection. And as you can see here, there's the media image. That's the first page within the digitized folder from the Phillips, the correspondence of Duncan Phillips. And so they already had a way to get the image and the metadata wrapper onto their website using MIMSIXG, and they were actually, again, because MIMSIXG is not a DAMS, they were actually linking the image from AWS. So that was really great because it meant I didn't have to reinvent the wheel, and we could fulfill the promises of the grant. However, there was still some budget allocated to improving digital infrastructure. Again, this was not going to be enough to purchase a new digital asset management system. The other issue with the money that was set aside in their minds for a digital asset management system was that, again, my position was only 3 years, and while it is possible that it would have been extended, there was nowhere in writing or documentation or planning that said that there would be funding for a permanent digital asset management system manager. And again, like, if you go through all the trouble of standing up a DAMS, which again could have taken a big portion of the 3 years that I had there, if it's in use and there's no one managing, like making sure that people are doing uniform file name conventions or metadata, things like that, the DAMS suddenly becomes essentially unusable. So what we ended up doing is using the funds that were meant for the DAMS to get archive space, which I thought was a really great and sustainable choice, because it meant that not only were these 2 archival collections that were getting digitized going to get more accessible, but actually the entire archive as a whole would become more accessible, because the finding aids are just, they're more usable, it's easier to link to them, etc. So it made it possible for the archive as a whole to become more discoverable by patrons and researchers. So we went with a hosted version of archive space because we didn't have a full-time IT person. When I started at the Phillips collection, it was in October of 2019. But during the pandemic, the head of IT left and was never replaced. We had a consultant working with us at a university, and she left during the pandemic and wasn't replaced. So by the end of the project, it was really just myself and a part-time processing archivist that was doing all of this work, which made it pretty challenging. But I think given all of that, I think we did a really good job and definitely honored the stipulations of the grant. So now I'm at a private university. It's an R1 university, and in case that doesn't translate outside of the US, it just means a large research institution where you can get a PhD. It's private, so for all of those reasons, it's just a very different working environment. And we are currently migrating our digital repository from DSpace to Haiku, which is an open source platform, and we are managing it ourselves. This is something that you just can't really do if you're at a smaller staffed organization. So I'm doing this migration with a team of 7, which is also really unusual, I think, for museums. So we have the senior systems administrator, the head of the department that I'm in, which is digital scholarship and technology services. We have a web services coordinator, a digital repository and preservation librarian, that's me, digital services specialist, so that's sort of the support role that like a processing archivist, but in the digital realm would kind of play, and then a senior software developer who, again, the fact that we have a position of a senior software developer really has meant that we are actually able to do customizations, and again, we are able to host this ourselves. And we are able to use an open software platform because, you know, he actually understands the code, and we're able to kind of work with the community in this different way. So this is all to say, when you are able to get grants and whatnot from any entities, I would say to really prioritize positions over tools and technology, because it's really the people in the positions that are able to make things happen. And that's just been my experience. So yeah, I'm happy to answer more questions, but that's all that I have to say for now. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel. Really interesting to see the difference between a small and a large organization, and that tips that it's more about the people who can help you do it than some of the tools. But I'll pass on really quickly to Jim now.
Hello, everyone. So I'm a photographer, so I'm going to talk a little bit about how MIMSI, the asset management system, and DAM systems affected me on a day-to-day basis. So what would happen is that a curator or a conservator or a designer would provide me with a list, and a list might contain a couple of objects, or it might contain hundreds. The photography could be for a new display, an exhibition, a publication. It could be new acquisitions. As an example, the John Byrne exhibition in Kelvin Grove a couple of years ago, I was given a list of paintings, but also memorabilia. All of these were going to be used in the exhibition. The objects might come to the studio 2 or 3 times, especially if they're receiving conservation treatment, and they would be photographed during that process as well. It could be weeks or even months before the treatment's finished, and it comes back to the studio for the final images. That's why large exhibitions are planned years ahead. Importantly, the list also tells me the size and weight of the object. That tells me if the object can be handled safely by myself, or if I need to book technicians' time to help move it. As an example, old master paintings could be 3 or 4 meters in width or height, and in very heavy gilt frames. The DAM record tells me this, gives me the information I need to work out whether or not I can handle the object myself, or whether it's I need to go to the technical department and book some staff. Every stage of the object being moved has to be recorded, and that is recorded in the DAM system. It was a cardinal sin in Glasgow Museum not to fill in an object movement form and send it to the collections management department every day so that its location could be recorded within MIMSI. After editing the images, we would add the metadata, and the images would then go to the DAM system and the photo library to be used for whatever the purpose the curator or conservators or designers needed. So now that I'm no longer with Glasgow Museums, I'm working freelance, and I have terabytes of my own images. I don't have a dedicated DAM system. For many years, I've used a family tree-like structure. The top level would be a set of folders, which would be the name of the project or the organization. Then you would have subfolders, which would have the date that the work took place, a short description of the project or that part of the project. And then subfolders within that again might contain a JPEG folder, a TIFF folder, and a RAW folder. And the client would only ever be given access to the JPEGs and the TIFFs, and I would archive the RAW files. I find that a lot of clients don't initially need the high resolution TIFFs. They like the JPEGs for social media, for publications, to email to colleagues, or for public inquiries. But I always strongly advise them to download and store the TIFFs, as they can be used at a future time for displays, large graphics, pop-up banners, that type of thing. Of course, that means lots of high resolution images, lots of storage. Currently, I favour Microsoft OneDrive. I have 5 terabytes of storage. 1 terabyte is used by my partner, and the other 4 are used by me in working folders, folders that I'm sharing with clients, and a couple of terabytes that I use for archiving. All my folders are mirrored between 2 other computers, just for safety's sake. I don't think Microsoft's going to go bust anytime soon, but you never know. I use lots of other companies as well, Dropbox, Google Drive, iCloud. As a freelancer, I find, especially amongst councils, they can't access certain companies' drives like Dropbox, perhaps, or Google Drive. And even some of the transfer sites, they're not allowed to use them because their firewall prevents it, or their IT department won't allow them. So you end up with multiple accounts with all these different companies so that you can work with different organizations. And I still occasionally get asked for images on a USB stick or even a CD. Not everyone's familiar with the various technologies that we use. I've also for a long time used Google Photos as a virtual contact sheet, and I've found it in search features are excellent for tracking down random images that a client might ask for. For example, you get an email from somebody you haven't worked with for a couple of years, and they say, I'm looking for such and such an image you did, probably, I think it was in June 21. Do you remember it? And so I go back to something like Google, and I do a date search or a description search based on what they're looking for. I then zip those images off to the client, and hopefully that 9 times out of 10, that's what they're after. The images coming off of the images I store in Google are quite small, but if it's for social media, they're normally fine. If they need a larger image, I can go back to the archives and find it in there. Because I've got more time, I've got all these different systems that I'm running, so I'm swithering about going to something like Adobe Lightroom to use that to manage my images. It's not a DAM system per se. It allows you to edit images and also to store them in different folder groups. So I'm kind of looking at that at the moment. So yeah, that's pretty much where I am. If you've got any questions for me, give me a shout.
Thank you, Jim. That was really interesting, and a nice kind of example of the importance of deciding your metadata as well that Alex had referenced in the very first presentation. But thank you very much. So yeah, this is just kind of a questions time. It'd be really good to hear from all of you, because there's been quite a lot within that. There's a question come in already from Alison around, does anyone have experience of using eHive? There are quite a few of the museums across the island, the Highlands, that do use eHive. It is one of, as Alex was talking about, the importance of user-friendly systems, and eHive is a very kind of user-friendly one for volunteers that we found. Are there any of the museums in the audience that use eHive? Just putting my gallery view back on. No, but Alison, we could put you in touch with, I know that Groom House, Ullapool, Grantown Museum, Castletown, they all use eHive as well. So yeah, that can be a really good system. Oh, well, hang on, Joe, you're here. You've used eHive. Do you want to say anything?
Yes. I'd ask what you would want to use it for, because I'm not sure as a DAMS it would be entirely satisfactory. But I'd be very happy to have like a phone chat separately with the questioner. If you could pass on my details, Nicola, that'd be grand.
Yeah, I can connect you with, I think it was Alison at Elgin that was asking that question, so I can connect you with.
Hello, Alison.
And David at Glencoe's just starting to use it as well. Are there any other questions?
I think there's one for me.
Yep.
Rachel, you're absolutely right. It is impressive that everybody does record the movement of objects, but Glasgow museums and like so many of the big organisations have, you know, upwards of 1 million objects in their collections in vast storage locations. So, you know, if there is a breakdown in the system, and it does happen, it's not perfect. You know, people forget to send in the object movement forms, or boxes get mixed up, or things get added to the wrong boxes. So, yeah, that is a really key part of the workflow, that you make sure that, you know, if an accessioned object is in a box or on a shelf, that people have to move it somewhere for conservation or for an exhibition, that is recorded. But we're all human. People make mistakes.
Thank you, Jim. I think when I was listening to Alex's presentation, there was a lot in there, and especially actually such a focus on everything to think about before you even start doing it, and all the different kind of processes within that, which could almost feel overwhelming if you've not started before at all. So have you got any sort of top tips that if you're right at the beginning and you're thinking, wow, I've got all of that to kind of consider, what are those first little things to get started and get you going?
Wasn't sure if that was directed to me or just all three.
Yeah, sorry, it was Alex. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, sorry. Oh my gosh. Really setting yourself up for success, you know, taking on typical project management processes, getting yourself organized, and taking it slow. Don't try and rush through this process. Otherwise, you'll find yourself in more trouble than you were before. Sometimes the vendors will try to rush you. So, you know, let them know what your organization's capacity and resources are available to, you know, so that they understand, you know, what you bring to the table and how you can move and how quickly you can move within, you know, that implementation process. I did include on my reference slide a top 10 tips blog from our website. I can share the link in the chat. Otherwise, I've shared a copy of my presentation with Nicola, so you'll be able to access those links on that presentation as well. But why don't I just go ahead and put that in the chat now?
Yeah, you could do that. As I say, we will send out the presentation with all those links, and that's good to see some of the top tips. Do you have anything to add, Rachel?
I guess just kind of seconding there's a lot of pre-work before even going to talk to a vendor, which again was sort of like one of the main reasons I was kind of like, I don't think we can pick a DAMS, you know, within 3 years when we haven't even like started the process of talking to all of the various users. But yeah, I think Alex is right. Like if you are using a vendor, like they will try to rush you, and just kind of trying to stay firm and know that like these decisions can't be rushed, or they will, like, you know, if you have a workaround for one thing, it kind of snowballs into having workarounds for a bunch of other things. So it's important to do things correctly.
Thanks, Rachel. Has anybody in the room sort of started on this journey and want to talk about their own experience, or share any challenges that they have around sort of being able to embed a DAM system within their organization?
I see Gareth's question in the chat about freeware open source DAMs exist. Yes, there is one that I can think of off the top of my head right now that's resource space. And there are a couple others that they are open source, you can download on your own, but they are also offered through service providers like Islandora. Rachel, Jim, I don't know if there's any others that you're familiar with.
No, for me, no. Not freeware anyway. I think one of the reasons why I'm...
Oh, sorry, Jim. Go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say one of the reasons why I'm looking at Adobe Lightroom now is because it already comes as part of the package with Photoshop. So for me, it's almost free in that sense. So it makes sense for me to go to that. And a lot of photographers and videographers use Lightroom for that very purpose. So if you've already got a cost, as in paying for Photoshop, then having Lightroom as part of that's a useful side product.
I've seen clients use Airtable and Google Drive and Dropbox. While not integrated, they'll use Google Drive and Dropbox to manage the actual digital assets themselves, and then Airtable to be able to link to those assets and then any relevant metadata for them.
Yeah, I mean, it may well be a familiar model for many of the other people in the room here, but the Stromness Museum, we have the primary collections, image collections database was originally running on Axial, that was ported into the back of our website to make it available for anyone anywhere to search the collections. But with that going through to Axiom, we've hit a bit of a sort of I think ultimately a funding issue there with the licensing costs, but also I've been at the museum for 4 years, and I'm acutely aware that within that we not only have this primary collection of that's database of our photography of our collections, but there are multiple archives of other material and digital assets that are spanning for all the formats you can imagine, USB sticks, old laptops that are sat in a cupboard, and CDs, etc. And though I haven't been tasked with coming up with a solution or even sort of really doing an audit of it all, the situation exists is where we've also been using Boxcloud as a secondary storage facility for a lot of the material that we have, but we're out of we've hit our limit. And yeah, I'm just trying to find just some sort of insight, because I've got the treasurer saying to me, what are we going to do, because we need stuff for all the governance of our small institution to be available online for all the other trustees to use, but then you've got the collections and asset management on the other side of it. So yeah, this has been a really good, all three of you who presented today. Thank you for it. But yeah, I think I'm going to have to go and perhaps do a bit of head scratching, and then perhaps find some grants for it, actually getting someone in who really knows their stuff. But thank you.
That's certainly something that we will work with even prospective clients, is if they need help looking for specific grants or even help writing grants. There are a lot of vendors out there that will provide grant information to you. So keep that in mind when you're researching vendors and looking at their websites. Yeah, I just want to make sure that I mentioned that.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. Thanks, Alex, and thanks for your question, Gareth. I think your situation is probably replicated across a lot of the museums in here. So yeah, if you're able to take a bit of that time to do a little bit of a more in-depth kind of audit and thinking around it, then yeah, get back in touch as you're looking to maybe get some financial support to spend more time, that to even give you capacity, and as Rachel's good advice before, of bringing people in, because it is often it's our time as well as our skills to do it, and having somebody that really knows to support you in doing that. And if we can help you to do that, then yeah, do reach out. We've overrun a little bit, so if there aren't any other questions, I'm going to have to wrap up there for today. But we will send out this recording. We will send out the slides, and there'll be my contact details as well. And I'll ask James to include the contact on for me at Museums and Heritage Highland, as I won't be with Expo North in another kind of 10 days. So yeah, so you can just kind of keep in touch, and we can help kind of get any more support as you look to move forward in this. It is quite a long journey, and I think taking the time to do it right is probably the key kind of message to take from this at the moment. And if we can support you to do that, we will. Thank you, everybody. James, do you have a final little wrap up that you have to do before we just head off?
Yeah, just to say thank you very much, everyone, for such a informative session for asset management from not only a organization point of view, but also from a production point of view, and it covered so many different perspectives that I'm sure that everyone will have gained an awful lot of insight after today. Thank you all for joining us. I've popped in a little bit of a feedback form as well. If you want to give us any feedback on this session, it would be greatly appreciated. On behalf of Expo North, thanks again. Please make sure to follow us on all of the social media channels, Facebook, X, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and keep an eye on our website for any further information as well. This session will be popped onto our XNTV section as well, so we will be able to have catch up for any of the information and go over any bits that you missed first time round as well. Have a great day, and thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks.